They burst out laughing when they saw her, a tattered jacket, faded and adorned with patches from another time. "Surplus store special, huh?" one recruit sneered, his voice dripping with mockery. Did she flinch? Not for a second. She didn't respond. She simply walked on, head held high, as though the entire training yard was hers to command. And, in a way, it was. She belonged here, more than any of them realized. We're going to dive into acts of compassion that brighten the darkest days. So, what really happened? And if you think stories like this, raw, real, and powerful, deserve to continue, share your perspective and hit that subscribe button now to help us spread the word. The recruits, eager and cocky in their brand new boots, thought she was a relic, someone who should have been long gone from Fort Claymore. But they didn't understand. They didn't know who she really was. Then the general appeared. His eyes locked on her, and his face drained of color. He stopped in his tracks, reached for her shoulder, and whispered one word that sent a shiver through the entire yard. The laughter died in the recruits' throats. Why? Because that patch on her jacket wasn't just old, it was legendary. Fort Claymore was built on discipline, tradition, and unwavering order. Every day began at 0600 sharp, with boots pounding the pavement in perfect synchronization, the rhythm steady as a heartbeat. Everything had its place, rifles, bunks, soldiers. Except for her. She wasn't on any roster, didn't salute any officer, and didn't belong to any unit. Her name tag simply read DC. Nobody used it. To the recruits, she was just the janitor, ghost, ma'am, or granny gear, their sneers sharp enough to cut through steel. Did their insults bother her? Not a chance. She glided past them, her olive-drab jacket worn by years of service. The sun had bleached it, but the stitching held strong, just like her. The recruits assumed she wore it because she had nothing else, maybe even living in the forgotten storage barracks behind the hangars. They invented stories about her, but never thought to ask. Why would they? She was just the old woman with the mop, right? Then came the fresh batch of recruits, brimming with confidence, fresh from basic training. To them, she was invisible, just a shadow sweeping the hallways. One of them, Reyes, spotted her cleaning the firing range and called out, loud enough for the whole base to hear, "Does she even know what a rifle looks like?" Laughter followed. Another recruit chimed in, "That jacket's seen more mops than combat. Bet it's a museum piece." "Yeah, she's the museum," someone else joked. Cruel. Absolutely. But she didn't react. She kept moving, the mop in her hand swinging with a quiet defiance. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the horizon, the recruits saw her crossing the tarmac. The wind tugged at her jacket, lifting it just enough to reveal a patch, an eagle clutching a sword through a bolt of lightning. It wasn't regulation. One recruit squinted and asked, "Is that even real?" Another scoffed, "Looks homemade. Total fake." More laughter followed, but none of them knew what that patch meant. At dinner, she sat in the corner, her tray bare, lost in thought. Did she check her phone? No. Did she talk to anyone? Never. She just sat there, still as a statue, a person untouched by time or the world around her. Every new batch of recruits went through the same cycle, curiosity, mockery, then dismissal. But this Thursday morning was different. This was the morning everything changed. It was inspection day, and the courtyard buzzed with tension. Recruits stood straight, breaths shallow, as General Mason walked through, aides in tow. The air felt thick with anticipation, until she passed by, pushing a wheeled bin. The general's eyes locked onto her, and he stopped dead in his tracks. His face drained of color. Without a word, he broke formation, he broke protocol, something unheard of, and walked toward her with a purpose. The courtyard fell silent. Mason stood before her, eyes fixed on the patch on her sleeve. "You wore that in Cunner?" he asked, his voice barely audible. She nodded, her response sharp and confident. Mason exhaled, visibly shaken, and straightened to deliver a crisp salute. A salute. The recruits froze, dumbfounded. One recruit even dropped his water bottle. No one dared move. Mason turned to the recruits, his voice cutting through the silence. "This woman," he said, "fought in places most of you will never see. Not even on classified maps. That patch? That's the Phoenix unit. 10 went in. 3 came out. She was one of them." And with that, the recruits' smug faces lost all color. The general turned back to her, his voice softening. "We never forgot." A faint smile flickered on her lips, a smile so small, yet it carried a weight that was felt by everyone. Then she turned and walked away, leaving them all in stunned silence. The recruits' mockery vanished. The laughter they had shared about her was gone, swept away by the knowledge of who she really was. That jacket wasn't just old. It was sacred. Word spread like wildfire across Fort Claymore, not because the general had broken protocol, but because he had saluted a janitor, not out of pity, but with respect, with reverence. A warrior had been standing before them the entire time, and they had never noticed. Her name didn't appear in any combat records. Her face wasn't on any wall of honor. But somehow, she had been part of the Phoenix unit, an elite recon and survival group so secretive that only whispers remained of its existence. After a brutal mission in Cunner, the unit was disbanded. Its files were sealed, the names redacted. Yet she wore the patch with pride, her connection to that legendary unit undeniable. Now the recruits were desperate to know more. They tried to make amends. Hartman lingered by the mess entrance, offering to carry her tray. She didn't acknowledge him. Miller left a steaming coffee on her cart, hoping for some sign of recognition. She ignored it. Even Reyes, the loudmouth who had mocked her jacket, stood silently as she passed, his eyes fixed on the ground. The air around her had shifted. She wasn't invisible anymore. She was untouchable. Lieutenant Breen, eager to uncover the mystery, dove into the archives after hours. He scoured clearance logs and military files, but found nothing, no enlistment, no medical records, no trace of her service. The only thing odd was her janitorial ID. It granted her access to all areas, even the armory. Stranger still, it was signed by Brigadier General Ethan Barlow, a name missing from records for over a decade. How could that be? Breen brought it up during a briefing. "Sir, about the woman," but before he could finish, Mason cut him off. "That woman has higher clearance than anyone in this room. Don't dig. You won't like what you find." The room fell silent. Breen didn't ask again, but the mystery only deepened. She continued her routine, sweeping corridors and emptying bins, silent and precise. The recruits no longer laughed. They watched her with a quiet awe. The patch on her jacket, once a symbol of mockery, was now a badge of honor. Then came the live-fire drill on the west perimeter. The conditions were brutal. Winds howled at 40 knots, dust choked the air, and drones buzzed overhead. Disaster struck when a drone malfunctioned, crashing into a relay tower. Power cut out. Comms were dead. Squad Alpha was stranded, pinned down by enemy fire. The command center erupted in chaos. But then, she walked in. No announcement. No fanfare. Just the steady tap of her boots on the floor. Mason's eyes met hers, and she spoke with calm authority. "They won't make it unless you get someone on that spotter tower." The room went silent. A colonel protested, "That tower's a death trap. The winds are too high." But Mason raised his hand. "She's right." 15 minutes later, she was climbing a rusted ladder of a Cold War-era fire control post, a crumbling relic of the past. She pulled out a custom-built sniper rifle, aimed, and fired. The target dropped. A moment later, Alpha Team confirmed the threat was neutralized. The command center stood still, processing the impossible. She wasn't just a janitor. She was a legend, a warrior who had walked among them unnoticed. She had saved them, and they would never forget. The base had changed. The recruits now stood with newfound respect, their eyes following her as she moved through the yard. General Marcus Trent arrived later that afternoon. His eyes found her immediately. "Still here?" he asked softly. She nodded, and with that, she continued her work. The recruits watched, realizing they had witnessed something far bigger than themselves, a legend who refused to fade. There she was, crouched low by the barrack steps, her weathered hands picking up a bent piece of rebar some careless recruit had tossed near the footpath. Why did no one else notice the hazard? She tucked it away with care, then rose slowly, turning to face the biting wind. For a fleeting moment, her sleeve caught the sunlight, and there it was, that patch. That faded, worn insignia with a single broken-winged falcon, stitched in shadow gray. A symbol so rare, it didn't exist in any official record, only whispered about in hushed, off-the-books briefings. In that single second, everything changed. Could a simple patch hold that much power? The general froze in his tracks. His aide muttered something about the schedule, probably some urgent meeting, but Trent didn't even blink. His eyes were glued to her, to that patch. "Where did she get that?" he asked, his voice low, almost reverent. The aide blinked, confused. What was so special about a janitor's old jacket? "Sir, the patch on her left arm." "Where did she get it?" Trent pressed, his tone sharp with something unspoken. "She's just janitorial, sir," the aide stammered. "Civilian rotation. Been here 3 years. Barely says a word." But Trent's jaw clenched tight. He knew something big. "That's not a patch you pick up at surplus," he muttered, disbelief lacing his words. Without a second thought, he brushed past the salutes of his men, striding through the line of rigid officers, straight toward her. No ceremony, no hesitation, just purpose. She turned as he approached, standing tall, her posture neither nervous nor stiff, but wary, like a soldier who'd seen too much. Her eyes locked onto his, and in that moment, something sparked in the general's gaze, recognition, raw and undeniable. He didn't salute. He didn't speak at first. He just stared at her, then at her jacket, his hand hovering just above the fabric, as if afraid to touch something sacred. "This shouldn't exist anymore," he whispered, almost to himself. "Can a piece of cloth carry that much weight?" She didn't flinch, didn't blink, just stood there, steady as stone. His voice softened, barely audible. "Your name isn't on the books. Not in the current ones. But I remember that insignia. Classified under Tier 7. You were never supposed to be deployed." Her gaze didn't waver. "I wasn't," she replied, her voice dry as desert sand. And with that, she turned, pushing her cleaning cart toward the corner of the building, leaving the general rooted to the spot. His aide shifted awkwardly behind him, but Trent's mind was elsewhere, lost in memories only those who'd served in shadow ops could understand. What secrets did she carry? Without another word, Trent pulled out his encrypted phone and dialed, not the base commander, not the Pentagon, but a buried extension known only to a select few at Fort Meade. "I need to unseal a file," he said, urgency crackling in his voice. The voice on the other end stiffened. "Name?" they asked. "She's not in the system," Trent shot back, frustration creeping in. "Look under designation Sparrow Fall." Silence hung heavy. Then, "That's archived. Deleted post 93. Not authorized for retrieval." Trent's voice dropped to a whisper, heavy with conviction. "She's here. Alive. Wearing the patch. That's all the authorization I need." He hung up, his mind racing. Who was she? The next morning, a black SUV with no markings rolled onto the base, slipping through a side gate like a ghost. It pulled up to the main hallway of Fort Preston's training command, an ancient building with creaky floors and walls lined with history, photos of generals, heroes, legends. But that day, the recruits weren't talking about the past. They were buzzing about her jacket. That faded olive drab, those patched elbows, the uneven stitching on the shoulder seams. Why did it draw so much attention? Lexi wore it again that morning, just like always, not to make a statement, but because it was hers. A jacket that had endured deserts, jungles, freezing night drops, and blistering extractions under enemy fire. To the recruits, though, it just looked old, out of place. She probably found it in a donation bin, one sneered under his breath. Another laughed, louder, bet it belonged to her husband or something. Cruel. Absolutely. But Lexi heard every word. Did she care? Not one bit. She kept moving, shifting crates in the corridor, fixing a flickering ceiling light, resetting a blown fuse no one else had even noticed. She was a ghost, silent, invisible, yet impossibly efficient. Then Major Bradford stormed in, clipboard in hand, his presence silencing the hallway. He was on one of his surprise rounds, checking for cleanliness, discipline, anything out of line. At first, he didn't even glance at Lexi, but then, something caught his eye. He stopped mid-step, blinked, and zeroed in on her jacket, on that patch. "What's that?" he demanded, his voice sharp, almost accusing. A recruit, smirking, piped up before Lexi could. "Her little vintage touch, sir." The major ignored him, stepping closer to her, the air thick with tension. "Where did you get that?" he asked, his voice dropping low, almost cautious. Lexi looked up, her eyes steady. "It was issued to me in Kandahar," she said simply. The recruits exchanged glances, their smirks fading. "Kandahar? Her?" Bradford stared at her, long and hard, then turned and walked away without another word, leaving a cloud of confusion in his wake. What had just happened? 7 minutes later, General Whitmore himself strode into the building. The base commander, in here. That alone was enough to make the recruits snap to attention. Something big was going down. Lexi didn't budge, calmly replacing a cracked outlet cover near the rec room. Whitmore's eyes found her immediately, ignoring everyone else. He walked straight to her, paused, and slowly removed his cap. Then, in a move that stunned the room, he gave her a formal, full salute. A salute. "Staff Sergeant Alexandria Holt," he said, his voice carrying across the silent hall. "I never thought I'd see you again. It's an honor." The recruits froze, jaws dropping. Lexi stood slowly, nodding with quiet respect. "General," she replied. A whisper rippled from the back. "Wait, Holt." "That Holt?" Another voice hissed, "But she's the janitor, right?" Whitmore heard them, and his voice boomed, commanding attention. "She's more than that. Staff Sergeant Holt led a 6-man extraction team behind enemy lines in Helmand when she was 28, he declared. Brought every single one of her men back alive. 2 silver stars. 3 commendations for valor. Trained more operators in recon fieldcraft than any instructor in her class." The recruits stood speechless, their world turned upside down. He let the words sink in, the weight of them settling like dust after an explosion. "And yes," he added, a proud smile breaking across his face, "she fixed our comms tower by herself in '09 during a blackout, after it was sabotaged. I was there." His gaze softened as he looked at her. "You never stopped serving, did you?" Lexi shook her head, not with bitterness, but with calm resolve. "No, sir. Just changed uniforms." The hallway fell silent, the hum of the fluorescent lights fading into the background. Time itself seemed to pause, the weight of realization pressing down on everyone. Who was this woman they'd laughed at? One by one, the recruits who'd mocked her, who'd whispered cruel jabs behind her back, raised their hands in slow, deliberate salutes. They dismissed her, laughed at her patched-up jacket, her quiet presence. But now they saw her, a warrior, a legend who'd never needed their approval. Did she revel in their newfound respect? Not at all. She didn't smile, didn't gloat. She just turned back to the outlet, pulled her screwdriver from her belt, and got back to work. Her purpose was clear, her duty unwavering, no applause required. That night, the mess hall was louder than usual, but the air had changed. The snide jokes about the janitor were gone, replaced by whispers, questions, awe. "Who is she?" one recruit muttered, staring at his untouched tray. Others scrolled their phones, searching for her name, Holt, Staff Sergeant Alexandria Holt. Those who found fragments of her story stayed quiet, their faces pale. Near the back, Lexi sat alone, not out of shame or exclusion, but because that's where she always sat. She sipped her tea slowly, her routine unbroken, her presence steady as ever. Her dark blue work pants, gray t-shirt, and name patch reading, A. Holt, were the same as always. But that falcon patch? It wasn't just fabric anymore, it was a legacy, a badge of battles fought in shadows. Across the room, Lieutenant Carver, who'd been the loudest skeptic just a day before, pushed his tray aside and stood. He'd been the one to lead the mockery, his ego puffed up from his days as a top cadet. But now, something had shifted. He crossed the mess hall, each step deliberate, like he was approaching a live grenade. Recruits turned to watch, conversations halting as his boots echoed. Lexi didn't look up as he stopped at her table. He cleared his throat, nerves betraying his usual confidence. "Staff Sergeant, may I?" She gestured to the bench across from her, silent as always. He sat, hesitating. "I didn't know," he said finally, his words heavy. "I mean, no one told us." Lexi stirred her tea, her movements slow, calm. "No one needed to," she replied, her voice steady as stone. "But we should have," he blurted, his words tumbling out. "We should have asked, or at least paid attention." She looked at him then, not with anger, not with pain, but with those calm, piercing eyes. "Respect isn't about knowing someone's file," she said. "It's about how you treat people when you don't know who they are." Carver nodded, the weight of her words hitting hard. "Why didn't you tell anyone?" he asked, genuinely curious. Lexi's lips curved into a faint smile, tinged with wisdom. "Because telling them wouldn't have changed who they were. Watching them realize it on their own. That might." She stood, collected her tray, and walked to the bin, leaving the room forever changed. The mess hall didn't snap back to its usual chatter. Not that night. The next morning, a fresh pot of coffee waited in the janitorial wing, left anonymously. A sticky note was taped to the machine, scrawled with one line, "Thank you for your service, Staff Sergeant Holt." A day later, the supply sergeant offered her a new jacket, custom-made, modern cut, her falcon patch carefully re-stitched onto the sleeve. She accepted it, but only because her old one was fraying at the seams. She wore it with the same quiet dignity, a warrior who didn't need the spotlight, a legend who let her actions speak louder than any words ever could. What a moment that Friday was. During the weekly all-base briefing, General Whitmore called her forward, Lexi, the woman they'd all overlooked. The entire base, staff, recruits, instructors, officers, held their breath as she stepped into the spotlight. Whitmore handed her a sealed folder, its edges crisp, its weight heavy with meaning. Inside, a letter of reinstatement, honorary, symbolic, but oh so real. "You don't have to wear the rank," he said, his voice ringing clear across the hushed room. "You've already proven it." Can you imagine the pride in that moment? Lexi thanked him quietly, no grand speech, no fanfare, just a small, respectful nod that spoke volumes. As she turned to leave, something incredible happened. The entire briefing hall rose to their feet and saluted her, every last one of them. Not because they were ordered to, but because they wanted to. They finally saw her, truly saw her, for the legend she was. How could they not? In the days that followed, Fort Preston felt alive in a way it never had before. Mornings weren't just routines anymore, there was a spark in the air. Young soldiers who once shuffled through their drills with heads down now looked up, their eyes lingering on the cleaning staff, maintenance crews, cooks. Not out of pity, but respect, hard-earned, deeply felt. Lexi. She just returned to her shift, same as always, same schedule, same steady routes. Did she want the spotlight? Not a chance. When a base reporter begged for a photo, she waved them off with a firm but kind, "I'm not the story." The silence, that's the story. Isn't that profound? But the base couldn't let her fade back into the shadows. One morning, as she pushed her cart down hallway D, where snickers once echoed about her tattered jacket, she stopped short. Bolted to the wall was a polished bronze plaque, gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Its top line read, "In honor of Staff Sergeant Alexandria Holt for serving quietly, for fighting loudly, for reminding us who we are." No ceremony, no announcement, just a quiet tribute that spoke louder than any parade. Word spread like wildfire, and recruits came in hushed clusters, reading the words, standing taller, their hearts fuller. No one snapped selfies. This wasn't for show, it was sacred. Late one evening, Lexi stood alone before the plaque, the hallway empty, the silence thick. Her fingers traced the engraved words, not out of pride, but remembrance. Faces flooded her mind, the translator she lost in Syria, the friend who bled out in her arms, whispering, "Tell them we mattered." For years, she'd buried those memories, but now they lived again. Footsteps approached, and she didn't turn. A familiar voice, General Whitmore's, spoke softly. "They think the plaque was my idea." It wasn't. Lexi's lips curved into a faint smile. "I figured," she said. "You made this base better." "Not with medals or speeches," he replied, his voice warm with admiration. "With your presence, quiet, steady, unshakable. You showed us valor doesn't need a stage." She turned to him, her eyes calm but fierce. "I didn't come back for recognition. I came back because this place is full of kids trying to be soldiers. Someone had to show them how." Whitmore nodded, his voice firm. "And now they know, because of you." He saluted her again, not for cameras, but for her alone, in a hallway that once rang with mockery. She didn't return the salute. She didn't need to. Some things outshine rank itself. At a base-wide mentorship event, they begged Lexi to join a panel. She declined, of course, too much fuss. But she agreed to a quiet Q&A, just for the recruits, off the record. The room was packed, the air buzzing with anticipation. Hesitant questions came first, then bolder ones. What kept you going? Why didn't you tell anyone? What would you say to someone who feels invisible? Lexi paused at that last one, her gaze steady. If they don't see you yet, walk like they already should. The room fell silent, then erupted in deep, emotional applause, not for a caped hero, but for a woman in a janitor's uniform whose war was fought with dignity, day after day. That night, back in her quarters, Lexi found a dozen handwritten notes on her bunk. No names, no signatures, just raw, heartfelt words. One read, "Thank you. You made me believe I could matter too." That, she realized, was all she'd ever needed. Isn't that what true heroism is? Oh, Lexi's story hits hard. It's a gut-punch reminder that true strength doesn't scream for attention, it whispers through quiet, unwavering duty. I'm in awe of her resilience, living with such dignity despite being mocked and dismissed. It makes me furious how society often overlooks the invisible heroes, janitors, cooks, everyday workers, who carry silent burdens of valor. Why do we glorify loud achievements while ignoring those who serve without applause? Lexi's life screams that respect isn't owed to titles or uniforms, it's earned through character. Her choice to stay humble, to teach through action, not words, inspires me to look closer at the people around me. Who else are we missing? This story pushes me to challenge snap judgments and honor the quiet warriors among us. We need to celebrate these unsung legends, they're the heartbeat of humanity. Thanks for joining us on this intense ride. If it resonated, hit subscribe, ring the bell, don't miss out. Here's to the silent sacrifices, together, we're unstoppable. See you next time.